Well, I am very happy today to be with someone whom I now consider a friend, Allison Jones, who's at the Botanical Garden up at Clemson, and you're the Education Program Coordinator, which means I think some adult and children's programs. I think that what we're going to do today is going to excite anybody. And you have a phrase or a word you use for this upcoming part of the season of the year, so tell me what it is.
Yeah, I think I'm here today kind of as the embodiment of Hallow-Thanks-Mas, which is kind of that 3-month period from October through the new year where it's all holidays all the time, really. You go into any store and you see the decorations everywhere.
I know, and they start so early too. And so you've got a turkey hat and you've got some, is it reindeer eyeglasses? Or?
I do reindeer, got some Christmas wreaths. And of course, some ghosts for the impending Halloween.
Ghosts. Okay, well you've got it covered then, and of course it's especially fun for you because you've got 2 little girls who still get so fired up about everything.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We were at McLeod Farms a while back, and pumpkins, 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 and we generally think of those as Halloween and carving them, but you've got, I think, what is really a great idea because it's safe. It's hard to carve a pumpkin safely, to tell you the truth. I mean, they're tough, and that you can use the pumpkins for Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. So, can you tell us? Shall we start with our Halloween pumpkin and see where we go from there?
Absolutely. Yeah. So like you say, Halloween, you think of pumpkins, right? And I love carving pumpkins. That's something I enjoy doing every year. But when you're working with young children, especially, like you say, it's not particularly safe for them to be too hands-on. So it's nice to have some no-carve pumpkin options that they can participate in a little bit more hands-on. And so for a lot of people, that means painting pumpkins. And my children have done that in years past. Where we'll, just use paints or sometimes stickers to add decorations to pumpkins.
When you're going to pick out a pumpkin that you're not going to carve and transition for a couple of months, is there something you specifically look for, and what kind of paint do you feel is a good paint to use with children?
Sure. Yeah. So for the paints, I would suggest using an acrylic craft paint, and that's what you typically are going to find at the stores. And as for picking out a pumpkin that you want to last a long time, what you really want to avoid is soft spots. So you want to feel the pumpkin, make sure there are no soft spots, avoid any kind of browning or bruising that's on the pumpkin, and you want a decent stem on it. And if it has a little bit of green on the stem, that means it's that much fresher. It doesn't have to be green, but that's an extra bonus if it is. And you just want to avoid, when you're transporting it, bruising it or breaking off that stem.
All right. And our friend Tony Melton reminds us not to carry them by the stem. He said you should always carry the pumpkin by the body because you might injure it by putting all that weight on the stem. So thanks for that tip, especially if you see a little green. That's a cool idea.
A different sort of idea that we've tried out this year, you'll oftentimes see these kits in the store that'll have different face pieces of stickers, or sometimes they're little plastic bits that you stick into the side of the pumpkin. And that's a cute idea, but you don't have to buy a kit to do that. You can essentially create that same sort of thing at home with things you have at home. So we made this year 2 different examples. The first one was a cat pumpkin. That was just the design that my girls were interested in. So all you have to do is get some, you can either use cardstock or you can use craft foam. I would suggest if you're going to put this pumpkin outdoors uncovered where it could be rained on, use the craft foam. That'll hold up to the weather better. But all you've got to do is think of whatever design you like, try to translate that into some simple shapes, especially if you're not super artistically inclined, and then just cut out simple shapes that you can essentially create a mask or a costume for your pumpkin. And in the case of our cat, we created those shapes and then we kind of embellished with a little bit of pipe cleaner. We added some cat eye pupils and a little mouth out of pipe cleaner, because what kid doesn't like pipe cleaners? They're fuzzy, they're fun, So we added those on there. And then our second example is not using paper or foam, but was really easy to do. We created a mummy pumpkin using cheesecloth. Now you could use cheesecloth, or you could use like gauze bandages, or you could even cut up strips of fabric. And my daughter just wrapped it around the pumpkin until she got that look that she wanted. And then we just added on some googly eyes and some pipe cleaner little eyebrows. And then we crafted a little black widow out of a pom-pom and some pipe cleaners to add on top. And they both turned out really, really cute. And both girls loved doing them.
And we've got several name brand craft stores that are all over the place now. So any of the things you mentioned would be easy to find them. And I think Elmer's glue is a good safe glue to use around children, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so you certainly can use a craft glue like Elmer's or Aleene's or one of those well-known ones. But what I suggest for this project, which makes it much less messy and easy to work with, is double-sided tape. So it's really handy because you can put it on those pieces, and then little hands, like my 4-year-old, she could just pick those pieces up and stick them on. She really concentrated and, put her effort in, but it was easy for her to manipulate that. And if it was a little not how she wanted it, she could move it around. So it works really well.
Well, Allison, we've eaten all the candy and had a horror when we stood on the scales. So let's move on to the next season, which probably will make that weight gain even worse.
Exactly. So one of the coolest things about doing your pumpkins this way, where you're basically just using that double-sided tape to put a mask or a costume on, is that you can then remove it and you're left with a really pretty plain orange pumpkin. And we all know that a pumpkin in all its orange glory, is a great Thanksgiving decoration in and of itself. But if you want to take it a step further and have another fun project for the kids, you can turn one of your pumpkins or several into a Thanksgiving turkey. And this is very similar to what we did with the Halloween pumpkins. So again, you'll need either cardstock or craft foam. And you're going to start by just creating simple shapes for the head and neck of the turkey. You can just do a little triangle for the beak and kind of a teardrop for the wattle on your turkey. And then you can add either googly eyes or just use a marker and draw eyes on. But the cool thing that I like about this design is that to create the tail feathers and the wings, you're going to have your kids trace their little hand shapes out. And little ones might need some assistance for this part. And of course, they'll be cutting it out, and the same goes for that. But this is a really good project for practicing tracing and cutting. And then once they have those pieces, again, they're going to be able to stick them on using that double-sided tape, which again, my 4-year-old really thought that was cool to stick all those on there. And it makes for a really cute little table decoration or putting in the dining room for Thanksgiving Day.
Well, and I think anytime the children feel like they've been a part of the decoration and a part of the process, there's so many things they, like the big pulling the turkey in and out, they can't do. But if they're, if you're fortunate enough to be able to have some family with you this year, that would be so much fun for everybody. They'd be so proud when their grandparents or their aunts or uncles start praising them for that wonderful turkey sitting in the middle of the table, plus the one that you're going to enjoy eating that comes out of the oven.
Exactly. It's their way they can contribute. And another idea that I really like for this particular project, because you are using their little hand shapes, is that, if you save the pieces for the following year, you can, potentially remove some from last year and add a new handprint for this year. And you could write the child's name and the age that they were when they made it, so that by the time they're teenagers and they're way too cool to do stuff like this, you can have a turkey that represents, ages potentially 1 through grade school on that turkey display.
I have a friend who has a scrapbook for every year of her 2 girls' lives, and although that's not something I could ever, but this would just be, if you're starting with little children, what a fabulous idea to save those and then bring them out in the future. It's like, going in the closet and seeing how tall you are and making a mark with a pencil. What a great idea, Allison. Well, I don't know that we're going to have any let it snow, let it snow, let it snow, but we can always wish. And I think you got an idea of how to transform these pumpkins into snow time pumpkins.
That's right. Yeah. So if you have pumpkins that are still in good shape when we're moving into December, which mine always usually are. I've had a few times where they didn't make it, but generally speaking, they're in good shape. And if you have those pumpkins, you can then reinvent them once again and make them into a snowman. So this is something we do every year for the past couple of years at my house. And it's really a simple, easy, and really quite an effective little display, I think. But you just start, I usually make mine with 2 pumpkins stacked. But if you only had 1 pumpkin, you could make just the head and it could be very cute. Or if you had squat pumpkins, you could stack 3. But you're going to need pumpkins, of course. And you're going to start by removing the stem of whichever pumpkin is going to be the base.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, because you're going to, of course, need to stack on there, right? So up until now, I've said take care with the stem, don't damage it, but this is going to be the last leg of your use, so you can do that. And you want to make sure it's a really flush cut so that the pumpkin on top will sit stably. But you're going to then paint the pumpkin, or pumpkins rather, white. And you can do that with spray paint, or you can do it even with acrylic paint. If you use the acrylic paint, I would suggest using like a sponge brush. That'll give a better effect, because if you brush it on, it looks kind of streaky. But you're just going to paint them white. In my example that I made, I had actually already painted my largest pumpkin white because I had used painter's tape on it to create a jack-o'-lantern face in kind of a relief. And so it was already somewhat white. But anyhow, you'll paint those pumpkins white. Once they are dry, you're going to want to locate where you think the snowman, you plan for it to live, where you would like for it to be displayed. And then you're going to stack those pumpkins up and kind of get them positioned how you want. And once you have them in position, now it's time to just start accessorizing, grab some different hats to try on. You can use a scarf on it. I oftentimes use wired floral ribbon for the scarf because it's lightweight, it's easy to work with, and I like that I can pose it so it looks like it's in the wind. And it just makes a really cute little snowman. And you might find that you're done at that point. I really love the look of the simple, just white with no face on it. But of course, my girls and many folks would prefer to have a face on the snowman. So you can do that very easily just using a Sharpie. We usually will kind of just draw some simple facial features. Again, if you don't feel like, oh, I'm not an artist, I can't draw a face, just stick with circles for eyes, circles for the mouth, and a triangle for the nose. You can do it. And then you can add some color with markers or paint. And if you have a place to display both the front and the back, then you can enjoy both looks. We often do that. We'll aim the face to where we can view it from a window inside, but then the simple white snowman is facing the street from our porch.
And I believe you have a way to make them kind of glistening if you want to.
Yeah, if you want to add kind of a snowy effect to them, you can use a little bit of glue, and you can add some Epsom salt. This is something that you can do to the pumpkin itself, or you can also add it to the hat. And speaking of the hat, if you don't have a traditional snowman stovepipe hat, you can often find them as a decoration in stores. It's a decorative item. But if you don't find one, you can make one pretty simply using felt and duct tape. You need about 3 sheets of a 9x12 felt. And what you're going to do is look around your house and find items that will help you trace a circle, right? So in my case, it doesn't have to be an exact measurement. You just drudge the proportions you like. But in my case, I found a plate to trace the brim of the hat and a canister to trace the top portion of the hat. And then again, a pro tip, use a white crayon or something if you need to see on the black felt you're tracing. Once you have that traced out, you're just going to take your bottom brim portion, fold it in half, and cut a circle out of the middle. And that's just so it can sit down on the head of the snowman. It doesn't have to be a big size hole, just big enough to help it get over the stem and sit down. And then you have one sheet left. You just fold that long ways and cut it in half. And then those pieces are what you're going to use to form the sides or the pipe portion of the hat. So you're gonna have those two halves of your last sheet, okay? And once you have measured out how much of the second half you need, you'll cut off the excess, and you will splice those two pieces together with a piece of duct tape. And at this point, you're going to take duct tape and run it along both of the long sides of your long pieces of felt and one side on the short side. And at that point, you're going to go around with your scissors and make little notches all around. This is what's going to help it all come together in the end, okay? So once you have your notches in, you will fold the felt into a pipe shape and get that closed up, and then use the tabs to attach it to the brim by just pushing the tabs kind of towards the center. And this can be a little fiddly, you have to be patient and just take your time with it, right? So that none of the duct tape shows, and you adhere the top of the hat in the exact same fashion. And once you have it all attached, you can add a ribbon. And like you say, you can add some snow if you like as well, by just adding a little bead of Elmer's glue, spreading it out and sprinkling Epsom salt on top. And now you have a little snowy stovepipe hat for your snowman.
And if you want to, you can just have a stocking kind of cap. And if you had one that one of your children had worn, that would be kind of sweet and special too, wouldn't it?
Exactly, exactly. I was just about to say, you can get really creative with it. You don't have to do kind of the stereotypical snowman, right? So actually last year, my daughter drew a little picture of two snow girls that were kind of representative of her and her sister. And we did that. We kind of recreated that with smaller pumpkins that we had, and we used little hats that had been their hats as babies, little winter hats. And then I just took a shirt and cut it up so that I would have some fabric to make scarves. And they were thrilled with that. And honestly, I was pretty thrilled with it. They were really cute.
Well, you have just given us so many ideas. I'm going to really think about doing this. I'm fortunate I've got a front porch that's covered. So I could put it there if the weather was inclement. And I just think the idea of going through the season with the pumpkin, that's just fun, and to think and to. There's a darling little girl who lives across the street from me, and so I'm just going to have her come over and help me be creative, because I'm sure she's got better ideas. But you've given us so many wonderful things to think about. And Allison, you sure are a great person for education coordinator at the South Carolina Botanical Gardens. I wish they could come over and take a class with you. I'm looking forward to that day when we can do that again.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you for having me as always. I love joining you guys.